Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Adams, and I just want to thank you all so much for joining us today for our third annual virtual IPR. I hope you guys all really enjoyed the wine. Again, I am recording this seminar for those who were not able to attend live today, so I hope that's okay. And we do ask you to please try to stay on mute. And if you have any questions, definitely feel free to put it in the chat. We'll definitely be monitoring that. And then at the end of the tasting, we will be opening it up for questions, and anybody can ask questions after that. We also have a couple promotions. So following the tasting, Jim has the information, but for members of the Justin Wine Society, you guys will get a 30% off anything that is non-icon wine after the tasting. So if you want to stock up on some more 2020 ISOSCELES or 2018 or any other wines, definitely feel free to do that. You could also reach out to me as well.
And which wines are not included on the discount? Because we have like 3 wines, I think, that don't get included in that.
We do, yeah. So it's the Isosceles Reserve, the Platinum Reserve, or the Platinum and the Focus. Those 3 are excluded, but everything else is you can order to your heart's desire.
Yeah, and you get 30% off today for this one. It's a one-time only. So if you're a member, if you're not a member and say you don't know a member, we have another code that you'll be able to get 20%. Is that what it is? Yeah.
Correct.
So
20%. So you can be a member for the day. So that's kind of exciting.
Right, exactly, because that's the normal member discount. So
yes.
Cool.
Yes. So now I want to hand it over to you, Jim. Jim, thank you so much for putting this all together. And I really can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today.
Well, thank you. Let's see. I'll spotlight myself here, I guess. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. This is nice because, you know, last year when we did this, we had more people, and I kind of like groups of this size. It's about 20 people that we've got online here. We may get up to closer to 30, but we're recording this, so there were some folks that couldn't make it, and we're just going to do it so they can see it afterwards if they want to. Yeah, so what's really nice about this is if you do have some questions and stuff, I'm going to go through a little bit of a presentation and stuff. I would say during the presentation, put your questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get things finished up, and you know, I can hang around a little bit after the hour when we finish up. So if you've got time and you want to ask some questions, I can sit around and chat a little bit. Yeah, so we'll kind of take it from there, but I like this size group because it's a little less formal and we don't have to stick to the chat quite so much. Okay, well, let's see, let me get to the point where I can share the screen here because that's going to be important. There we go. Okay, so everybody should be able to see that. Okay, so this is Jen used our acronym that we have, IPR, but it's the Isosceles Retrospective. I'm sorry, Isosceles pre-release, and then we typically do an Isosceles Retrospective, which basically would be 3 vintages of Isosceles so that we can kind of go back. And this one we're going to feature the 2020, the 2019, and the 2018. And so you should have gotten your package in the mail, and like I say, you'll go ahead and open your wines up, and I would say you know, go ahead and pour those 3 glasses if you can. If not, then you know, we can kind of pour as we go along here, but it's kind of nice, give them a little bit of air as well too, but to be able to go back and forth and compare. Let's move forward here. There we go. Okay, so let's talk about Isosceles blend. You know, everybody's familiar with Isosceles. Hopefully, I think most people are members. So, you know, you've gotten shipments with Isosceles in it. But you know, this is our flagship blend. You know, and it's based around the Bordeaux varieties. And we're actually going to go to Bordeaux. How's that sound? And I'll explain a little bit why this wine is made out of the grapes that it's made of. But essentially, it's the whole reason that Justin Vineyards and Winery was established. So, you know, when Justin Baldwin started the winery back in 1981, he had visited some of the famous estates in Bordeaux, which is his favorite wine region in France. He was living overseas because as part of his work, he was an investment banker back in those days. And he visited some of these estates, and he was so influenced by them that when he came back, he decided to get into the wine business. And this area is very famous. It's in the southwest of France. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well too. But that was the inspiration for isosceles. So really, it's what we call a left bank blend. So it's the western region of Bordeaux. Okay. So it's made from Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Cabernet Franc. And these are the three main grape varieties that you find in that region of Bordeaux, and in Bordeaux in general. There's another region on the other side of the river from the left bank. It's called the right bank, of course. They feature wines that are made out of Merlot and Cabernet Franc. So they don't use as much Cabernet Sauvignon there because it's a little cooler and Cab doesn't grow there as well. But Cabernet Sauvignon comes from the left bank. That's the western region of Bordeaux. So it's a blend. And this allows more control over how the wine turns out, gives added complexity, and helps to balance the wine a little bit more than a single varietal wine. Like if it were straight Cabernet Sauvignon. And we'll get into that in the presentation here today as well too. So what we like to say is this is kind of a new world incarnation of First Growth. Now, First Growth, there's 5 estates in the left bank that are particularly well known, and they are classified as being the top producers of that area. So essentially, we like to think of isosceles as our New World version of those First Growth wines from the left bank. But it's got distinctly unique characteristics from Bordeaux, and that we're going to get into as well too. So I'm just kind of teasing you right now. I get a lot of input from people, and I like to listen to people too, because there's always some good suggestions. And so they say, well, Jim, you talk for 20 minutes and we don't get a chance to try any wine. So what I decided to do this time is let's put the wine up front. So go ahead and try your 2020 isosceles. And my personal preference is I like to start with the youngest wine first and then kind of move back. And some people say, well, yeah, but that jades your palate because the younger wine is typically a little stronger or a little bit more, tight. We'll talk about that as well too. And as you go back, the wines get a little bit more subtle or whatever. But I like to, most people are used to drinking younger wines. So I like to start with what people are used to drinking and then kind of go backwards. Now, we're not going way back. We're only going back 3 years, but you will see some changes in these wines. Not that they were exactly the same on release, but you will see some changes that are good general. And we'll talk about that toward the end of the presentation here today as well, too. So, all righty. So what this year's is it's an isosceles year. So everybody knows an isosceles triangle is it's a triangle that has 2 equal sides. So in this case, it's 88% Cabernet Sauvignon, 6% Cabernet Franc, and 6% Merlot. Now, I know somebody there is a geometry teacher or something in the crowd, and they're going to say, well, you can't have a triangle that has only 6 degrees on those because those lines wouldn't meet, right? But in theory, the 2 angles are equal. So basically, I would say that this qualifies. Not every vintage is like that, and we like to joke around about that, basically. But it's mostly Cabernet, and at 88%, we can call this wine just a Cabernet if we wanted to, because it just has to be over 75%, and then you can put Cabernet on the label as what we call a varietal wine, basically. So, all righty. Before we get into this, so let's talk about this wine. I mean, I think this wine has everything that we think about in a new vintage of isosceles. And frankly, on a pre-release basis, this wine really hits the market typically in June. So if you're going to a store and trying to find a 2020, you're not going to find it for a while. But what we like to do is pre-release it to our members. And so what you're getting the benefit of that right now, and to be able to taste it and order it as well too. But I think you'll see that, this wine has the general characteristics of what you look at. It's got that nice black cherry characteristic to it. And the lot of complexity, lots of spice. Vanilla, cinnamon, that type of a thing. And those are a lot of influences from the barrels, as well as the grape varieties that are in here themselves. And then, as you taste this wine, I think it's going to taste very much like what you would expect a young isosceles to taste like. I will make some statements right now that you can compare them against the other wines and you'll see. But to me, this wine isn't ready to drink yet. The palate on this wine is a little bit closed up for me. Okay. In other words, I feel that it's not expressing itself completely. Now, it's a lot better than it was when we sat down on the tasting panel and decided what the composition of this wine was going to be. In other words, which lots we chose, and what percentage of each of the grape varieties we wanted to use. And the wines are typically about 6 to 8 months when we do that. So you can imagine they're really closed up. The wine is very young and it's just not very expressive. And if nothing else, the 3 wines that we're tasting today is going to give you an idea in the short term on how these wines evolve and how that palate opens up. So when I tell you that this wine is a little bit closed up right now you'll have to take my word for it. But as we taste through the wines, you'll see what I'm talking about. And we'll actually kind of describe that a little bit. To me, the tannins are up front a little bit more. I feel the acidity on this wine a little bit more as well, too. And to me, the flavors and the aromas on this wine are kind of disparate. They kind of stand like they're have you ever seen the Rocky Mountains, okay, versus the Appalachians? The Appalachians are kind of smooth and the Rocky Mountains are really spiky. This wine is that youthful kind of spiky where each of the elements kind of stands on its own, and nobody's decided like how to get together yet. I always say it's like when you go to a party and nobody knows, if you go to like a cocktail party that nobody knows, who does cocktail parties anymore? But anyway, when you go to a party and there's a lot of people there that you don't know, everybody's kind of standing around and they have a couple of drinks. And after about an hour or so, everybody's slapping each other on the back and stuff like that. And, so, I mean, this wine hasn't gotten a chance to really know itself yet, but it's getting there. And there's some really good elements in there. I think you'll find that it's a really flashy wine and it's spectacular, but it will get better over time as well, too. Yeah, definitely. I tried them a little bit before we got started. So yeah, I hope everybody can see what I'm talking about. It's a little bit crisp, very mouthwatering as well, too. The structure on this wine, which the structure typically is tannins, acidity, and the alcohol to some extent are up front. And what you'll find is as we taste through these wines, the flavors tend to open up and the fruit comes out more. And you'll find that the wine appears more balanced over time as well, too. So, all righty, let's get back to our lesson here. So this is Chateau Margaux, and this was really pretty much the archetype for Isosceles. This is one of Justin's favorite estates, and when he went to Bordeaux, this is the one that really most influenced him in what he wanted to do with Isosceles. So, essentially, in fact, he told me one time that he planted the varieties in the vineyard to the same percentages that they had in Margaux. But he found out quickly that the climate in Paso is very different than it is in Bordeaux. So he had to kind of change things around a little bit, but it's a good idea. And I mean, you got to start from somewhere. So this was pretty much his archetype, and it's kind of a classic, literally classic architecture, but it's kind of a classic chateau when you look at it. So beautiful grounds. They make some great wines as well, too. Bordeaux itself is located in the Bordeaux region, in the southwest of France. And you can see on this map, there's an area that says left bank and right bank. That's what I was telling you about. There's actually 2 rivers that come together. You'll see it on a map coming up, and then it flows out to the Atlantic Ocean, which is just around where this arrow is over here. So that's where Bordeaux is, in case you're not familiar with it. So this is the home of Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet was discovered there. It was propagated and kind of, sent out to the world from the left bank of Bordeaux. So it's considered to be the home of Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's located in a really cool northern climate. So everybody's familiar with, like in the United States, if you're down in California or, Arizona or something like that, it's warmer, right? You're closer to the equator, so it's warmer. As you go further north, you get up into Minnesota or something like that, it gets pretty cold. And you get up into Canada, it gets even colder. So the further north you go, in the northern hemisphere, at least, the cooler it gets. In the southern hemisphere, the further south you go, it gets cooler. So that's what I mean by this. And I'll show you a map in a second as far as where Bordeaux goes. But take my word for it, it's fairly cool there. Okay. And it's not as cool as it could be because it's moderated by the water that surrounds it. So let's look at this map again. So now you can see there's the Dordogne River that flows in from central France. And then from the south, there's the Garonne, and then it forms something called the Gironde estuary, and that flows out to the Atlantic Ocean. So this is the left bank right in here. Okay. So basically what you'll see is the Atlantic Ocean on one side and the Gironde estuary on the other side. So when you're surrounded by water, what it actually does is it makes your winters a little bit warmer. Okay, and your summers tend to be a little bit not cooler, but it tends to moderate the temperatures in both seasons. And so what you're going to find is that compared to other regions in the world, at this latitude, it's actually not that cold of an area. It could be a lot cooler. So you can actually do some grape growing here that you might not be able to do elsewhere at the same latitude. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So Cabernet Sauvignon, this is something that you have to remember. It's a late ripening variety. In other words, it takes a little longer on the vine in order to ripen. For a cooler region to grow a late ripening variety is unusual. And that being surrounded by water actually kind of helps Cabernet to survive here. And even though it was found there first and it kind of went out into the world from there, and this is considered to be the start of Cabernet Sauvignon, it's actually kind of difficult to grow Cabernet there. And it's right on the edge of ripeness and maturity for this late ripening variety. Now, it's on the 45th parallel. Okay, so this is the longitude, right? Or the latitude, I should say. And if you extend that 45th parallel over to the United States, I don't know if you can read this or not, but you're just below Portland, Oregon. Okay. Now there's a wine producing area that's just south of Portland, Oregon. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called the Willamette Valley. Okay. And they can't grow Cabernet Sauvignon over there. Okay. What they grow there is Pinot Noir. They're very famous for Pinot Noir, and it's a cool climate style of Pinot Noir. It's like between California and Burgundy in style. So it goes to show you what a difference it makes to have that area surrounded by that water in Bordeaux, and the fact that they can grow late ripening grape varieties. And like Pinot Noir is like you grow that where you grow white grapes that require a cooler climate, so they don't over ripen basically. So. All right. Now, the wines from this region are different, and cooler climate wines tend to have a different characteristic than what you're drinking right now, which is coming from a warmer climate, Paso Robles, and we'll make that comparison here in just a second. So cooler climate wines have more red fruit character. The wines that you have now are based in black fruit. And what I mean by that, think of black cherry and red cherry. Okay. Black cherry is richer, rounder, smoother, kind of bigger on your palate. Red cherry is a little bit more kind of structured and a little more angular, maybe a little crisper. You get that sense, like think of, like raspberries versus blackberries, there's a little lighter as well too. So basically that is a function of the climate. It's more crisp on the palate. And what we mean by that is the wines typically have higher acidity. Wines that are grown in cooler climates, the grapes don't lose their acidity during the season quite as much. Okay. Warmer climates, you tend to have that. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well too when we talk about Paso Robles. The other thing too is the structure. The tannins on these wines tend to be pretty much up front because that fruit isn't there to soften the wine up. It's a redder fruit. There's more acidity too. So what you'll find is these wines, the tannins really are right up front. And the tannins are the things in a red wine that dry your mouth out. Okay, so when that happens, then what you can do is tannins over time integrate with other components of the wine, and they integrate with them and they fall out of solution. And what happens is the wine starts to smooth out a little bit over time. So this whole idea of saving wine in a cellar, like Bordeaux, you really don't drink for 5 or 10 years after you buy it. It just turns into a better wine. In fact, it's kind of hard to drink when the wines are really, really young. So essentially, it's a function of the cooler climate and the kind of grapes that they're using as well too. So that the tannins in Cabernet Sauvignon are quite high, and you feel that in the younger isosceles that you just had as well too. And typically cooler climate wines tend to have a little lower alcohol as well too. So conversely, if you go to Paso Robles, you'll find that the wines are typically 15, 16% alcohol, which is, maybe not unusual for us, but in Bordeaux, they're 14. Used to be 12 and a half, 13 and a half. And you'll see how the climate has changed in Bordeaux to the point there as it's warmed up, they're more now in the 14 and a half, 15% range, typically. Okay. In Bordeaux, it's all about the blend. Okay, in the Médoc, which is another area that the left bank is called, the blends are primarily Cabernet Sauvignon with Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and Merlot, and possibly Petit Verdot. Sorry, I kind of screwed up. I made some changes at the last minute. Cabernet Sauvignon should have been highlighted in yellow. I wanted to kind of put those the grape varieties up front in yellow. But so Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and then possibly a little bit of Petit Verdot. In the United States and sometimes in France, but not much, you'll find a little Malbec in there too. Those are considered to be kind of the primary Bordeaux varieties. So let's talk about the Bordeaux blend. Why do you want to blend? All right, and I've kind of alluded to it a little bit already, but let's get the elephant out of the closet here. So blending Cabernet with other variety gives you insurance. If you're growing a wine in a cooler climate like Bordeaux, and you're growing a late ripening grape like Cabernet Sauvignon, there are going to be some years where that wine isn't going to ripen, and you're going to have some problems making some quality wines in those years. However, let's talk about timing and grape varieties. Merlot is early budding and early ripening. Okay. So that grape is going to be ready in a cooler year. And you might even find that you're going to use more Merlot in a cooler year than you're going to use than Cabernet Sauvignon in order to make a quality wine. So you can see what I mean by an insurance policy. If you go to Malbec, it's kind of a mid-ripening grape. And like I say, that's considered to be one of the Bordeaux varieties as well, too. Cabernet Franc is mid to late ripening. We'll talk about the parts that each of these play in the blend as well, too, in just a little bit. But this is just to kind of give you some idea of, why we use the grapes we do. And Cabernet Sauvignon is late ripening. Okay, so you can see that having that difference from late ripening to early ripening in different types of conditions that you find, if you have a cooler year or a warmer year, you're going to kind of switch your blend around because you want to make a good wine, because you want to sell your wine so you can come back next year with the money you made from the wines you sold and make more wine, right? So it's a good business model to have an insurance policy like this. So this is pretty much where this blend came from. So these grapes did not come together by accident. If I had more time, I'd go into like the parentage of each of these grapes. But, Cabernet Franc is actually one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Okay, so I mean, there are some of these grapes that had been there for a long, long time, and basically through cross-pollination, they came up with other grape varieties. So, so these are grapes that were available, and they were able to make some really good wines with them. So they kind of ran with it, and that's how the Bordeaux blend came. When it came to the United States, what we did is we looked at the archetype of Bordeaux, and we said, hey, Cab. Merlot, Cab Franc, I'm going to make a Bordeaux style blend. And that's kind of where it started. And you'll see why we were able to do that here in just a second. Petit Verdot is another one too. Incidentally, you've probably heard of this before, but it's not usually used much. We use it in ISOSCELES Reserve from time to time, and typically less than 5%, because it's a kind of a burly wine. It's got some pretty heavy tannins to it. It's got a lot of color to it as well too. But it's a picky grape, and it's almost harder to grow than Cabernet Sauvignon. So, but in Paso, we're really well suited for these late ripening varieties, as we'll get into. So, okay, so we talked about the different grape varieties. Now, each variety has that different ripening character. So this assures you you're going to be able to make a quality wine when the climate gets a little bit cooler, or maybe even if it gets a little warmer in one season, you can change things around. So I'm hoping everybody, offer up if you've got any questions as we're going, offer them up in the chat here. I've got that sitting in front of me here in case there are questions, but I just wanted to lay a really good foundation here, because I think this will explain historically where these grapes, why these grapes are used in the blends and why we call them Bordeaux blends. So that was kind of my reason for putting this in here. And incidentally, now we get to taste the other wine. So I'm front loading the wines here a little bit. So So how long can you hold grape varietals for blending? So what we typically do, and I think I'll try to answer the question to the best I can. I don't think I totally understand the question, but we blend our wines at about 6 to 8 months. Okay, so we make the wine in the fall. Typically in the spring, what we do is we'll take a look at those wines, start tasting through them. And then usually we make all our blending decisions in somewhere between May and the end of June. And so that's when everything gets put together, because then it goes back into the barrel again. And those grapes those different varieties get to know each other in the barrel. So as they spend time together, they integrate a little bit more, and they start to become more complex as well too. So as far as how long you can hold them, yeah, so 2023, this good. I don't mind answering questions right now, simply because we're at a good break point here. The vines are asleep right now. Essentially they could be underwater for 2 months and it really wouldn't affect them much. So the amount of rain we're getting is awesome. It may not be convenient for us right now because people are stuck in the mountains in snow and all that good stuff, but we're really happy to see the mountains full of snow, because that means that we're going to have some water this year that we can kind of use for various things, including running our households and things like that too. Let's see. Yeah, so if you planted 15% of your acreage for Merlot, but had a warm, hot year, maybe where you didn't want the Merlot to blend, can you hold it for a cooler year? Okay, I think maybe that's going back to the original question. There are laws. You can use 5%, up to 5% of a grape from a previous vintage and still call it the vintage of the other grapes. No, you're pretty much going to have to figure out what you want to do with it. And that's where second labels come from. If you go to certain stores that kind of, sell wines at a little bit lower price, and they have their own labels on them or something like that, that's typically where those wines go to. And it doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that you're not going to spend $75 a bottle for it. It may be worth $20 and it might be a nice drinker for that. So hopefully that explains it. And that's where, if you've been making wine, I mean, we've been making wine since, 1987. So essentially our formula is pretty locked in. Isosceles is going to be mostly Cabernet and almost equal amounts of Cab Franc and Merlot. Most years, that's pretty much what it is. So when you know that, then you adjust your planting so that you have the best candidates. And then we have wines like Justification that can kind of take some of the Merlot and Cab Franc that we didn't use. At least that's how Justification got started in the first place. And then, then we have 15 or 16 other wines. Okay. I'm going to talk about the percentage of alcohol here as we go along here a little bit longer. So let's get back to the program here. But yeah, that's a good question. Why 16.1 on the 19? We'll get to that. Okay, let's talk about the 2019 here. So I think if you taste it, you have the benefit of a year. Okay, and I think already the nose is much more open. I'm getting a lot deeper, darker fruit characteristic, and I'm getting more spice coming in on the nose. It's a little more rounded on the palate. The alcohol is a little bit higher on this wine, just kind of how it turned out that year. And it's interesting. And let me talk about that when we talk about the final blending point that we're going to be talking about. But I think what you'll find is this wine, the tannins are still there, but the flavors appear to kind of fill in the palate a little bit more. And I think, why we call this Isosceles pre-release is the 2020 is not really meant for release yet, but it does give our members a chance to get a few bottles of it early on. And I'm often kind of confused and amused by some people who kind of rush out and want to buy all the newest vintages. To me, I think Isosceles drinks better when it's about 2 years after release. Now, obviously, the only way you're going to be able to do that is you buy your wine, you put it in a cellar, you hang on to it, and then you open the bottles as they're a little older. I think Isosceles drinks wonderfully in the 5 to 10, maybe even 15-year range, depending on your taste. And if you're a fan of older wines, I mean, I'm still drinking 2005s and things like that, So, I mean, it's just a matter of what your personal taste is. But I think these wines, certainly in the first 2 or 3 years, they get nicer. And there's a good suggestion here to get yourself a cellar and hold a few bottles of these vintages so that you're not paying premium prices to go back and buy library wines and stuff over time. So I don't know, just a thought. And I know that Jen has some of these wines available for sale as well too, so we can talk about that after the fact. Then you can actually kind of contact her. I'll put up her email and everything. I think most of you probably have it already. In case you wanted to get some stuff, she can fix you up with some older vintages if you really wanted to. So, okay. So that's kind of my feeling on the 2019, and we'll kind of make that comparison toward the end again as well too. This one here is, it's about 80%. It's 79% Cabernet Sauvignon, 11% Cab Franc, and 10% Merlot. And let me talk about this now. You'll understand a little bit better after we talk about Paso Robles. But basically, when we make isosceles, we don't have an isosceles vineyard. Okay, so it's not like we get the same vineyard grapes every single year. So isosceles is not necessarily an exercise in showing what a vineyard gives you every year. Okay, what it is it's the best, it's the best blocks of grapes. In other words, a block is like an area of a vineyard, okay, that's separated from different parts. So you have like, maybe there's 10 blocks in a particular piece of property or something like that, and they can be planted to different grapes. So when you have Merlot from one vineyard and Merlot from another vineyard, they'll be different because it might be a little cooler. The soils might be a little bit different. So just because it's Merlot or just because it's Cabernet Sauvignon doesn't mean that, it's the same Cabernet as you can find, say, on the other side of our Paso Robles AVA. And we source from, there's 11 sub-districts in Paso Robles. We source from 10 of those 11 sub-districts. So we have a real variety that we can choose from. And isosceles basically is the culmination of tasting through all the different batches of wine that we've made and coming up with the best blend that we feel is going to represent what we want isosceles to be for that year. So that's 16.1 for 19, which, so I'm looking at my chart here, and 19, was a cooler year. So, intuition tells you that the alcohol should have been a little lower. But what they did is they found that the Cabernet in that one batch, or it could have been the Merlot that we used in there as well too, because Merlot typically has a little higher alcohol. It's earlier ripening, so it delivers more sugar at harvest, and typically the alcohol is about a point higher on Merlot than it would be for Cabernet in most cases. So it's just the way the blend turned out that year. And since we blend by taste, okay, we don't look at the formula. The formula comes up after we taste the wines. And typically what we have is about 3 or 4 different test wines that we go through. And what we'll find out is that, this one tasted the best, and we think this one has the best potential. And then afterwards, Scott Shirley will tell us like what the blend is and where the grapes came from and all of that good stuff. And so we really don't know until after we've chosen the wine. So that's why you can get 16.1. And 16.1 typically comes from vineyards that maybe are in warmer areas or in warmer years. Because as I said, more sugar gets generated in those grapes in a warmer year. That sugar gets fermented into alcohol. So, and we ferment our wines dry. In other words, we don't leave any residual sugar in them. So essentially, that potential alcohol can be higher if there's more sugar in them. So it's kind of how that one wine turned out that year. And we've had a few that have bumped into that 16 range. But alcohol can actually affect the balance of a wine as well too. And sometimes with the amount of fruit that's in a wine, like this 19 is pretty rich. Sometimes you need that alcohol to kind of balance the fruit as well too. So I think that that's kind of how we decided on that final blend for that particular year. It's the one that really hit our palate the best, and we felt it had the best potential. So I remember that discussion from the 19 as well too. So all right. So let's get back to kind of grapes and where they're grown and all that good stuff. So here's the world, and I touched briefly on latitude and longitude and stuff like that. But basically, the latitudes that grapes grow in, there's a Goldilocks zone on the northern and southern hemisphere, and it's typically between about 30 and 50 degrees. Okay. If you try to grow grapes outside of there, if you don't have something special going on, like remember I said in Bordeaux, they're at 45 degrees, they're pretty close to the limit, but they're growing a late ripening grape. And it's because they're surrounded by water. There's an area in Argentina, okay, called Salta, okay, and they can grow grapes at 25 degrees, okay, and they're really close to the equator. You think it'd be really warm, but they're at 10,000 feet. So at that elevation, it's a lot cooler. So they're actually able to grow some nice white wines there, which typically need a cooler climate. So they're not hard and fast, but the Goldilocks zone for grapes is typically 30 to 50 degrees. And Bordeaux is at 45. Napa is at 38 degrees, and Paso Robles is at 35. Okay, so if you look at these numbers and think about it analytically, it affects the styles of these wines. So Bordeaux at 45 degrees is going to be more of that red fruit. The tannins are going to be more up front on release. The acidity is going to be a little higher, and typically the alcohol will be a little bit lower. You'll find with Napa, the wines are a little bit richer, a little more black fruit in there because the grapes have a chance to mature a little bit more and develop more flavors. And then the acidity is not going to be as high as you'll find in Bordeaux. So the wines tend to be maybe a little plusher on the palate. And the tannins will be a little softer, but if you go to Paso, the tannins are softer yet. More black fruit, and richer wines as well too, maybe a little higher alcohol levels as well too. So hopefully this kind of explains the differences between the three regions. Let's dig down a little deeper into this topic. So those of you that were here for previous years, you'll know that I got a little bit of a science background. So basically I don't sway away from numbers, and I got some good input last year about this. So I left some of this stuff in there, but this is the data from 1950 to 2010, average temperature in the growing season for Bordeaux. Okay. And when I started drinking wines back around here, I'm not going to tell you what years they were. You can see it for yourself on the bottom. I just don't. But you can see there were some pretty cool years, and Bordeaux really changed a lot since then because the Atlantic Ocean has warmed up. Okay. And you can see starting in the 80s, this slow climb. Okay. Now, this shaded area here, the bottom line here is pretty much what you need to ripen Cabernet every single year. And remember, I talked about how you're going to rely heavily on Merlot in those years that are below that line. Well, basically, they had to do that a lot. And there's still some 71s that are sitting in a warehouse waiting for the tannins to die down a little bit. Okay. I mean, I don't think it was a horrible time for Bordeaux, and they were just barely scraping by. And things got a lot better for them in the 80s, basically. But you can see now I did a little bit of research a little further to add to this. And these blue dots, I went back and looked at like critically acclaimed vintages for Bordeaux, and I added blue dots on those vintages, and you can see that whole supposition that Dr. Lewin talks about in his book here is absolutely right. That shaded area does produce quality Cabernet vintages, basically. So I think using that premise, that's a pretty good place to start as far as where you want to grow Cab. Now you can understand why they do a blend in Bordeaux, right? Okay, now if you look at Napa added on to this, and these are degrees, in Fahrenheit, basically. So you can see the average temperature, 60, 65, somewhere in that area here, maybe a little higher, 66. You can see in Napa, first of all, the vintages are much more consistent in California. We don't get those really cold and really warm seasons, these really spiky things here. You'll see that there's a couple of them here, but they're kind of more gradual from year to year. There's a couple that you'll find here and there, but essentially it's a little bit more even. And the other thing too is you will see that it's consistently in that zone. And that's why when you go in California, you will see that we can make wines that are made just from Cabernet Sauvignon. Okay. So that's why we don't have to blend all the time. Okay. We can make wines just from straight Cabernet and not have to worry about whether you can make wine every year. Pretty much every year you can grow a decent palatable Cabernet every year in California. Okay. You can split hairs on whether or not there's going to be the best wine in the world or whatever, but you can ripen and mature Cabernet, pretty much every single year in California. Now, if we take this, let's kind of draw back out a little bit further. If you look at Paso Robles now, the blue line on the top is average temperature for Paso Robles from the year 2000 going to 2016. The center line, the yellow line, is Napa. Okay, and then you'll see the Bordeaux, again, that's spiky, kind of more up and down kind of a thing. This is Bordeaux. So you can clearly see that the average temperatures for each of these over this span of time is different. So in Bordeaux, you've got about 64 degrees. In Napa, you're about 1.5 degrees higher, okay, roughly. And in Paso Robles, let's see, here you go. In Paso Robles, we're 1.61 degrees warmer than Napa and 3.46 degrees warmer than Bordeaux. So now you can see that the style of the wine is going to fundamentally be much different. You know, again, talked about that more black fruit that you're going to find in Paso, riper style, a little higher alcohol for sure, maybe a softer tannins because those tannins mature a little bit, and we'll talk about why that happens too. But basically, you know, you can see that the characteristics of the wines are going to be different from different regions as well too. Now, we have another secret weapon in Paso Robles that's pretty cool. So the red line on top and bottom, this is the day to nighttime temperature span, okay, you know, going through all the different months. So the white line is Paso Robles, the yellowish or orangish line here, whatever you want to call that, Sienna, that's going to be Yountville or Napa, basically. And then the blue line is going to be Bordeaux. So you can see there's not as much of a difference from day to nighttime temperature, but they don't need day to nighttime temperature changes because they're fairly cool. So they're not going to worry about like roasting the grapes or overdoing the vines. In California, that's the problem that we have is it does get a little bit warmer. And basically, we do have to worry about the grapevines getting too warm to make good wines. But when you look at the span of temperature differences, in Napa, it's about 35 to 40 degrees, you know, from day to nighttime temperature on average. In Paso, it's about 40 to 50 degrees difference from day to night. So what that does is it averages out that temperature, and it actually helps us to grow some really, really good grapes, to make some really nice wines, but with different characteristics to them as well, too. And I think I can build on this a little bit more too. So this wider diurnal swing, that's what we call the difference from day to nighttime temperature. It's called the diurnal swing. It allows, you know, the acidity, the grapes retain acidity, and acidity is that mouth-watering characteristic that you get in a wine, and that allows you to have your mouth be refreshed. Okay, so have you ever had a wine that has so much fruit, it's grown in a warm climate where acidity tends to drop if you don't have that lower temperature at night, and then the wine just seems really jammy. It just doesn't seem fresh, and it lacks acidity. That's kind of a problem. And some people like those wines because they're smoother. You know, they're fruit heavy, but they're not really balanced, and they don't get along real well with food. You need that acidity. Like if you have something that has a lot of fat in it or it's kind of rich, that acidity is going to generate more saliva in your mouth and kind of cleanse your palate a little bit as well too. So acidity is like really important. It's probably one of the key things that you want to think about in a wine, and the temperature is going to give you that. The average day to nighttime temperature is, if it's very wide, is going to allow us to retain that acidity a little bit longer. Now, you know, in the last 15 or 20 years, Paso Robles has really gotten to be well known for what we call GSM blends, Grenache, Syrah, Mourvedre. And these are the same kind of wines that they grow in a region in France called Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And if you look at our region, Paso Robles in red, okay, versus Avignon, which is just near Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you'll see that they don't have that wide, you know, they also don't have the higher temperatures that we do too. But you can also understand that why our wines, our GSM blends, tend to be more fruit forward, a little warmer, but then also nicely balanced with some acidity because we get colder temperatures at night as well too. I just kind of stuck that in there. It's kind of outside of the topic, but it kind of shows you what's so special about Paso Robles and why we can make some of the wines that we do. Hopefully that's making sense to people. So, you know, the wines will have full body, but great balance. And what we mean by balance is that the wine kind of clears off your palate. It feels fresh on your palate, and the flavors and textures all get along really well together. We have different soils here than they do in Napa, let's say. You know, if you're used to buying Napa wines, even though they're warm, they're not as warm as we are here. But what you'll find is the tannins in those wines tend to be really abrupt. And typically, I always say you got to wait at least 2 to 5 years before you drink your Napa Cabs, your good Napa Cabs. And the reason why is they have volcanic soils, and volcanic soils tend to show an edginess in the textures of the wine, and that includes the tannins. So it takes longer for the tannins to kind of calm down on those wines. Whereas our wines are ready to drink right off the bat. essentially these calcareous soils, they're alkaline, they're not acidic. So basically, that's kind of a funny thing I'll talk about in a second, but they attribute a little generosity to the palate. What I mean is the tannins tend to be a little bit smoother. The fruit tends to kind of show up a little bit more as well too with these limestone soils. There's a region in France called Beaujolais. They have both granitic, which are essentially volcanic soils. They tend to be acidic. And then there's limestone. And if you taste same grape, same region, pretty much the same climate, if you taste the ones that are grown in limestone versus the ones that are grown in the granite, you'll see a very definite difference in texture. The granite ones, you almost feel like there's like rocks in there. It's like, it's edgy. So we have that advantage on the palate, and it tends to soften the wines a little bit. Now, alkaline soils actually in the plant do the opposite of what you think. They actually kind of help to retain acidity in the fruit. So that helps us out because in a warmer climate, the acids typically drop a little bit more. Okay. So what happens is our wines, the acidity stays constant longer toward the end of the year. And those of you that are knowledgeable about Napa or knowledgeable about wine, you often hear when they talk about hang time and losing acidity, that's a problem that's unique to Napa. We don't have that problem here. You can let those grapes sit a little bit longer on the vine, and basically they'll mature. You'll get rounder, fuller fruit characteristics, softer tannins as well too. And the wines will be ready to drink early on. And this next slide kind of shows that as well too. We can do that for another reason. So if you look at Bordeaux, the red line is Napa. Okay. And then the blue line is Paso Robles. This is probability of rain. Okay. Going through the months. And if you look at the growing season, which is April 1st to the end of October, roughly. Okay. The rains kind of start in California. The rains come in here. In Bordeaux, the rains come in here. So you can see where they're in a hurry to get those grapes off. It's another reason why they have, their concerns about like whether the wines are ripe enough and all of that kind of stuff. But in California, you can certainly ripen the grapes. But when the rains do start coming in, essentially in Napa, you can see that the probability of rain starts climbing quite a bit when you get into October. We're typically still harvesting October into the end of, in the end of October, sometimes into the beginning of November. And, essentially those later rains, that allows us to leave the grapes on the vine a little bit longer. And that prolonged natural acidity allows us to be a little bit more patient. And really the end result is the grape tannins tend to be more mature, which means that they're smoother. They don't stick out the way. And when you taste Napa wines versus Paso wines, you'll see that pronounced difference in the characteristics. So when you talk about Paso Robles wine style, we have a long growing season with hot days, cold nights, and mainly these calcareous soils that really affect those grapes in a very unique way. The climate allows us to fully ripen and mature even those late varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon. It gives a full fruit character to the wine, but with balanced structure. And remember, structure is tannins, acidity, alcohol. Okay, so and really what balance is in a wine is all the components get together really, really nicely, and they interact with each other well. The wines are fresh on your palate. You don't feel like there's anything sticking out a little bit more than the other. Fresh acidity comes from those cold nights along with those calcareous soils that help to kind of keep that acidity at a certain level. Softer tannins from that longer growing season that we talked about. So again, full-bodied wines, freshness, softer tannins. They're easier to drink on release. I think you'll admit that this 2020 Cabernet, for being being 88% Cabernet Sauvignon, it's drinking pretty well, and you wouldn't mind sitting down for dinner with it right now. But it's got the structure to age. Okay. And if you want to hang on to this wine for a while, you can, and it will evolve. It will change. So why blend? The number 2 region. So we talked about the insurance in cooler years, but blending this is a way to refine or polish a wine and add complexity by using different grapes. It's just like anything else, like whether you're drinking coffee or if you're, whatever, you can go for a single variety if you want to, but you'll have to live with the edginess or the kind of the idiosyncrasies of a certain one variety. Whereas if you're blending, now you can kind of balance the wine out and go more for the palate. And that's really what we do with ISOSCELES. So in a visual way, Cabernet Sauvignon is the anchor of the wine, right? This is what we start with. We pick the best lots of Cabernet that we think is going to be, produce its isosceles quality, and it's going to produce a nice wine. Excuse me. It's the flavors in Cabernet Sauvignon. I call Cabernet Sauvignon the diva of wine grapes. Okay, I mean, at least for the Bordeaux varieties, it's got a high opinion of itself, and if you drink it on its own, I think you'll find that it's got a real strong personality, and some people like it for that, and some people feel that it's too rustic. It's not balanced enough, But if you're looking for drama, and Cab is the drama queen. Okay. It's got chiseled blackcurrant cherry, whether it's black or red cherry, it's pretty distinctive there. It's got a nice savory characteristic, typically kind of a dried tobacco leaf and some spice characteristic in there as well too. The structure, the tannins and the acidity is bold, distinctive. It tends to be, like a chiseled statue, kind of a thing. Chewy tannins and enough acidity to kind of, balance the wine out. It's late ripening, so we talked about that. Now, if I had to represent this visually, this is the picture that I would use. So, when you take a picture of somebody in strong sunlight, it's dramatic, right? I mean, this is a very dramatic picture of this particular person. But if you wanted to use this for a passport photo, I think the government would say, it doesn't look like anything. It looks like very dramatic, but I can't tell who you are. And so from the drama part of it, I think, Cab on its own is great, and it's a real statement wine in itself. Now, Merlot is what I like to call a modifier. It's softer, lusher. It ripens a little earlier as well, too. So that's why you get that lusher flavor profile. Typically, it lacks acidity, okay? And it's got softer tannins to it. What you'll find is kind of more plum and what we call blue fruit, ripe blue fruit. Black fruit as well too, sometimes a little cocoa or chocolate notes to it as well too, so it's got some complexity to it. To me, this is like a fill light. Okay, so you've got that first light, that's really strong, but then you put a little smaller light on the side, like I've got here actually in the studio. If I turn this one off, you can kind of get an idea. We're doing the same thing here, right? So, all right. Now, the thing about this is it's actually very easy to overbalance a wine, and then you make it boring. Okay, so Cab and Merlot are great, but they kind of cancel each other out to some extent, and that's where Cab Franc comes in, and it's an accent. Cab Franc has more red fruit, higher acidity to it. It has a distinct herbal characteristic to it, and it's mid-ripening, so you can kind of use it for that insurance as well too. It's a versatile grape, and to me, this is like when you put a couple extra lights in there and like a kicker light and stuff like that, where you make things a little bit more interesting from the balanced thing that we were getting with the Cabernet Sauvignon Merlot. And to be honest with you, when we sit around the blending table and we construct isosceles each year, this is exactly what we're looking at. It's like, it does need a little more of this, does it need a little more of that, or can we take that away, or whatever. And these are kind of how you do the push and construct a blend. To give you a quick overview here, essentially, this is average temperatures, this blue line for Paso Robles from 1997 to 2021. I am officially retired now, so I haven't put my 2022 numbers together yet, but I'll get together and do that at some point. This shaded area here is precipitation, and I would imagine this year is going to be, up here somewhere, so it's awesome. But basically, you can see there's like hot and dry years like 2014, which was a really fruit-driven wine. It had bold, kind of rounded, more fruity flavors, but it's evolved really nicely. It was a nice balanced wine, and it still is. It's still drinking really, really nicely. And then you end up with these other ones that are kind of cool and maybe down here cool and rainy. That's the 2019. Okay, but that came up with the highest alcohol because of the lots that we chose to construct that wine. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. It's like this chart will not always bear out the alcohol levels, particularly the alcohol levels. I think the characteristics of the vintages, whether they're hot or cool, will show up in the wine. I mean, if you go back and taste a 2011 or a 2010, you will definitely be able to see that cool climate and maybe even, the fact that it was a little wetter and all of that kind of stuff. But when you get into this range here, I mean, there's not as much of a difference. So I think that that 16.1 is probably more attributable to maybe the Merlot that we used for it. It just kind of pumped it up a little bit more. I don't know. Now, these are the 3 vintages that we just tasted, and we're about to taste the 2018. And then I've just got like one more slide after that, I think. So here's what you need to look for. After 2 to 5 years from release, you'll see that the color doesn't change appreciably. Wines start off purple, and then they start to get kind of a garnet color. Well, I don't think the 2018 is old enough to get garnet color, but you will maybe see a little bit of a difference in color. I didn't check it really for color. You'll find that definitely the aromas have developed a fuller fruit character, and there's more complexity. In other words, that spice, the barrel is coming out and interacting with the fruit a little more, and you're starting to get aromas that weren't in the wine originally. They're starting to develop complexity. And this is why I say at 2 to 5 years, I think you're drinking a nicer wine if it's isosceles. I think that wine has had a chance to kind of get to know itself. It's like that party that we talked about, where people know each other and they start to get a little more friendly after some time. But the palate appears fuller, more rounded, a little less tannins on the finish. And I think the next slide is, yes. So you kind of get an idea here. This is, essentially similar blend, 83%, 9%, Cab Merlot and 8% Cab Franc. There's a little more Merlot in this one than Cab Franc. Still 21 months and 100% new French oak. They're all that. But I think what you'll notice now, if you can go back and forth and taste between these 3 vintages, you'll notice that this wine here is a little smoother, it's a little rounder, it's gotten to know itself a little bit more. To me, I think it feels a little bit more, coordinated, a little more balanced as well too. And if I had to take my pick right now, I'd be drinking the 18. I'd be sitting on my 19s and my 20s. Are they bad wines? No, they're great wines. It's just, I think time is another function that a lot of people don't think about when they talk about a cellar, having a cellar. But I think it's an important, it's an important component to kind of looking at, what you're looking for in the wines that you drink. And if you're buying from a producer, that you like, think about buying a couple extra bottles. I'm not just trying to sell more wine, but think about buying a couple extra bottles. And if they're made, especially if it's made out of Cab, I mean, you can buy, our $25 or $28 or whatever it is, bottle of Cabernet now. You can put that in the cellar for 4 or 5 years. And I think you're drinking a better wine in that amount of time, to tell you the truth, even at that price range. You'll find that wines do kind of have a maturity curve that they go on. So, there are some grape varieties that maybe aren't meant to last as long, but I think Cab and Syrah, for instance, I think are wines that benefit from a few years in the cellar, and they drink pretty nice over that time as well too. So, let's see. Yeah, so that's my content. I'm going to put these up on the screen for right now, so that you can either do a screenshot or write them down or whatever. And if for any reason you have any questions and you want to get some wines and you want somebody to talk to, you can give Jen a call. That's her email right there on the bottom. So, feel free to take a snapshot of that if you want to. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing here in just a minute, but if somebody has a question, let's on mic and let's talk. And like I say, it's on the hour here. I can understand that, if somebody's got somewhere to go, then, on the East Coast, we've got folks on the East Coast, it's getting to be, past dinner time or something. But if you want to hang out here for a couple of minutes, I'm open to answering some questions. So let's talk. I see something pop up on the chat. Could you discuss the differences between right bank and left? Really, the primary difference is it's about 2 degrees average temperature at the soil line and the right bank than it is lower on the right bank than it is on the left bank. So essentially, they grow more Merlot there, and they use Cab Franc and Merlot. Cab doesn't really do as well because it doesn't ripen as well. So. You saw the graph on the 14. Yeah, how's that drinking? I think the 14 is doing well. there are some people that would think that it's a little bit over the top because it's an older wine and it's showing more of that kind of old book, smoky, kind of, more savory characteristic, but I really like it. What's my favorite year of isosceles that's available? I'll be honest with you. I haven't been in the office that much. Like I say, I'm kind of officially retired now, but I'm coming back to do special educational things and stuff. So I don't know what's available. But I would tell you there's a range right now. Since we do blend the wine to kind of perform well every year, there's a range in time that I think you can point out, since we don't have like a ton of like, those really low temperature vintages and things that we talked about in Bordeaux. I think that if you're talking 5 to 8 years, if you can get a hold of any of those wines in that range, I think you're probably talking about some good wines. Yeah.
Tim,
So,
I can check inventory right now to see what we have between that time.
yes, if you can, but if somebody's got any particular vintages, but I mean, I think the 18's drinking really nicely. I think, getting into the 16s and 15s, if you can find them, I think they'd be interesting. I think as you start getting older than that, there's going to be some people who don't like that kind of earthier, kind of more savory characteristic. Some people call it musty. But if you're a fan of old wines, I mean, those wines perform really, really well. And like I say, I had a 2010 not long ago, and it was tasting beautifully. So I mean, and I like older wines. So, and that's just my opinion. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, we can unmic if you want to too. So, if somebody's got a question, we don't have to do. What would I do with the 17? I'll be honest with you, the 17s. It's not a bad wine, but to me, I think it's drinking better now than it was when it was first released. It was not my favorite vintage when it first came out. I don't think it was a bad wine, but I think, for isosceles, but we had it last year. In fact, I just had a bottle of 17, it was about 3 weeks ago. And it's drinking really well. I was thinking to myself, it's like, wow, I really like that one. Considering the fact that I didn't like it as much when it first came out. Let's see, can you talk through how to determine which grapes go to the isosceles reserve? Okay, so isosceles reserve, what we do is we start our best wines first. So platinum, we pick our best cab. In fact, Scott Shirley picks out our best barrels. Okay. And that's what he constructs that wine out of. And then what's left from there, then we start constructing the isosceles reserve. When we construct isosceles reserve, which is Cab Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec potentially. When we finish with that, whatever's left over becomes a candidate for isosceles, and then we'll make isosceles. Okay, so that's how we decide which grapes and that goes by tasting the barrels and deciding which ones we feel have the best potential. So we start with the best material and then we go from there. Let's see. So do they also have the same percentages for each? No, it's a different blend. Isosceles Reserve is a totally different blend than isosceles is. It's made from different batches or different vineyards and different lots of wine that we make. Like I say, we'll taste through our whole inventory. We'll pick out the stuff that's most distinctive, and then we start with isosceles reserve, and then whatever's left over, then we'll make the isosceles. Hopefully that makes sense. You don't like the 2019, I'm sorry, but it is now growing on me, so I'll hold it. So another thing too is when you pour it in the glass and you let it sit for a little while, it interacts with air. It's not the same thing as aging, but you will find that a wine that is really tight on opening, that's why I told you open the bottles at the beginning of the tasting. It would almost be better if you poured them into decanters. Isosceles will take it. You can pour it in a decanter for an hour or so and then pour it out. And I think you'll enjoy the wine even better than when you first opened it. So it's a wine that I think not only can take some age, but it can also take a little bit of time. And if you have an older vintage of isosceles, you may find that there's some sediment in the bottle. You can very carefully decant it from the bottle to keep the sediment in the bottle. Just use gravity, just gently, and then leave it in the decanter for an hour or two. And I think you'll see that wine will be just beautiful afterwards. And in fact, the older vintages tend to need a little bit of air because, like some people think they're musty. I like that earthier kind of characteristic too. But yeah, I think you'll find all three of these wines taste better than when you first poured them. And why would I retire from such an awesome job? Well, I've discovered that I like to play golf. and I have a lot of work around the house. And I'm about at that age right now where I think I don't want to be tied to the office as much as I used to be. But you're right, it's an awesome job. And I've been with the company for 15 years now next month. So and I'm still on the payroll. I'm still doing stuff. But yeah, and not only that, but I have to say something. I think of Jen, I think of Jason, and a few other people. My cohorts. We got some really exciting young people that are very talented, and at some point or another, you kind of have to give them their show, and you help them out and you give them as much knowledge as you can and whatever, and then you really kind of coordinate and work together and help out as you can. But it's their turn, so that's kind of how I feel about it. So let's see. Meant that I didn't like it. Yeah, okay, yeah. No, absolutely. And Steve, and Carolyn, I said the same thing. About the 17, but I like it now. I'll drink it anytime. It wasn't my favorite vintage. And Scott Shirley, our winemaker, really liked it a lot. So, I mean, we always had these kind of pointed discussions, I guess. But, that's the thing about wine is, there's no real right or wrong. Your personal opinion is what it is. So just because I say I like a vintage doesn't mean that you're not going to like it. So there are a lot of people who like the 17, it's just, to me, I felt the wine typically has a little more potential every year, but I think it's drinking well now, and I'm not just trying to sell it, to believe me. Cool. Everybody's using the chat. I want to hear some voices. Come on.
Yeah. And I'll let you know, I can double check on the 17 inventory, but we don't have any 15 to ship out at the time, but I can see if I can get some of that over to our warehouse. But we do have plenty of 2016 isosceles, and that retails for $119.
Yeah, I think that wine would be drinking really well. And if you wanted to kind of experience, if you like the shift from the 2020 to the 2018, I think the 16 will start to show you the beginnings of the next step. And to me, my wife always gets on me because we've got all this wine sitting around. She goes, "What do you mean you don't have any wine?" It's like, no, I'm waiting. It's like I don't think this wine is where I think it's going to be, where I want it to be. And it's not that there's a peak. And I think there's something else to be said there too. It's like, if you really like a wine, if you like isosceles in general, every single year, get a few bottles. And if you have a cellar, you can put, even if it's a modest amount, even just 2 bottles, you know what I mean? Drink 1 this year, or drink 5 this year or whatever, and put 1 or 2 away. And then, what happens is after a couple of years, you open that other bottle, and then it'll tell you when you want to drink the next bottle, so if you have 2, at least you get another couple of shots at it, 2 extra ones, basically. You get a few shots. I always say it's like meeting somebody in a subway and not getting a phone number. If you buy 1 bottle of wine, it's like you almost lost an opportunity, or you're going to pay a lot more money. You can see that 2016 is a lot more money now, but that's because we've stored it. And there's some premium to that as well too. So, but if you bought the wines, you could have bought it for, $80 or whatever. You'd have it ready to drink for you in 4 or 5 years or something like that. So.
We do have a few 17s available as well. Not as many. We have about 41 bottles of 17 available. So it might be fun to do like a mini vertical with the 16 and 17 too. Yeah, I figured let me take a look at everybody here. Let me put you up on gallery here. Most of the people have their cameras shut off, but anyway, I love the interaction here. This is what's really nice about a group this size is that, you're all here. the tastings that are hard, when you have 100 people and you're looking at the little white light next to the camera over there, it's almost like you're in a studio and you're talking to yourself or something like that. So anyway, somebody had a question. I think I heard a mic open. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I'll give it a try. When I said I didn't like the 2019, it's like as compared to the other isosceles. So it's a high bar. I liked it, just not as much. Yeah.
No, and that's okay, and I think you're going to find out, the vintages do change a little bit from year to year, but what we try to do is we try not to have the wine fall out of definition. In other words, isosceles is going to be that black fruit, it's going to be spice, It's going to have a showiness to it. It's going to be, nice and smooth on the palate, but still have some tannins. It's going to have some ageability to it. And that's why by blending, what we're able to do is put these wines together in a way that you're going to like it every single year. You know what I mean? That gives us that ability to polish that wine from year to year. And the opposite of that is like if you go to Burgundy, where they grow Pinot Noir, and they've got like 4 rows in a vineyard, and they're making wine from those 4 rows. Well, that's what they call a terroir-based wine, and that's a wine that shows you what that vineyard gives you for that particular year. And you will get wide swings. You will get some years where it's not quite as good, and other years where it's better. And why they have Grand Cru and Premier Cru and all of that, the reason they have that is because there are some estates that no matter what, even in a cooler vintage, they're able to make really good wines from those grapes. And it's like a talented area. It's like a baseball player that can they can play the outfield or pitch or hit or whatever. Every once in a while that stuff comes along. So yeah.
So we were fortunate enough to stay at the inn in 2021.
Yeah.
And walked the vineyards every morning.
Nice.
And, I mean, I
And
forget.
you ate at the restaurant, which is now a Michelin starred restaurant.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And not only that, we have a Forbes 5-star rating as of 2 weeks ago, I think it is.
Yep.
Yep. So we're Forbes 5-star, and we have a Michelin star, and we're working on our 2nd star for Michelin now.
So we were walking around looking at the grapes, and it's like, those are going to be like the Cab Franc. I forget what row it was, 21, 11. So I'm going to forget. But should we look for those in next year's?
Absolutely. That'll be next year's ISOSCELES pre-release.
That'll be the next year's. Okay. All right. Looking forward to that.
And that's the, I was in Bordeaux in 2016 last time. And I ended up buying some 2016s and put them away in the cellar. I haven't drunk them yet, but because it's like I tasted some of those wines out of barrel there. So it's like it's pretty cool. And that's the thing about wine is like you can't do that with Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? It's like it's a product of nature. It's something that happens. So let's see. Do we have any pictures of the tasting areas within Justin? I believe that would be on the website. I don't know if I have any of that stuff there. That's more of a marketing question, I guess. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, and with all of the publicity that we've gotten from Michelin and Forbes, I think if you Google Justin, the restaurant at Justin, I think you'll find all sorts of pictures, particularly of Chef Rachel, and she deserves it too. She's done a great job.
Yeah.
And we have a great tasting room, and we've got all sorts of exciting stuff. We've got another tasting room downtown as well too. So if you don't feel like going out to the countryside, it's about a 15-mile drive out to the winery, which is not bad. It's beautiful. It's a great drive. But if you just want to taste some wines really quickly, we've got that. And we have a menu, a restaurant menu at the downtown tasting room as well too. So a little bit of plug for our hospitality here.
We also do chocolate and wine tasting as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Chocolates are made by our pastry chef. It's fantastic. Somebody had a question. I heard a voice.
Jim, more question for Jen. Any chance that we're doing another tasting with Rachel and maybe suggestions for food or recipes with food?
I would absolutely be on cloud 9 if we did a tasting with Rachel. We don't really have anything in the pipeline yet in terms of virtual tastings. I know that Chef Rachel curated a really great menu. There was an in-person event this weekend at our estate in Paso Robles, and she helped kind of curate the menu for the new 2020 ISOSCELES. But I definitely would love to pitch an idea to have Chef Rachel co-host maybe a cooking class. I think that would be really fun.
We should get Justin in on that too.
Yeah,
she's done a couple and they've been amazing. Like her recipes are awesome, and obviously I love her food, but we enjoy the chance whenever she comes along to present.
Well, thank you. I will definitely reach back out to the powers that be and a pitch, say, hey, I got a really important request do another Chef Rachel tasting and cooking seminar. We did last year partner up with an organization called Truffle Shuffle, and they're another group of Michelin starred chefs, and we actually got a pretty good feedback from that experience as well. But I think nothing can beat Chef Rachel. So thank you for asking. I will definitely bring that up.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Any other questions here? This has been great. Somebody's, let's see, Steve said he's going to open ISOSCELES Reserve 2019 after this. Do I have a min to give some tasting notes? Oh, a minute to give some tasting notes. Let's see. I don't have a 2019 here in front of me, so it's like I can't do a formal kind of tasting note thing. I know we publish tasting notes on the website. I think 2019 is the that's the one that just came out last November. So it should be up on the website as well too. But yeah, I mean, you know, the thing about it is, like I say, the wines, because we do the blending from a number of different vineyard blocks, the wines are fairly consistent from year to year. So I would say that, you know, what you're tasting in your glass right now, you can amp that up. You're going to have a lot more barrel influence because the barrels that we use for ISOSCELES Reserve are a lot showier. There's a lot more Taranceau barrels, which is a particular brand barrel that is just great with Cabernet. And it just gives spice like galore, complex layers of spice. You'll get, you know, cinnamon, licorice, cardamom, you know, I mean, it's just phenomenal stuff. But I think the base, you're going to find there's a lot of black fruit led by black cherry. And then some red fruit on the side, basically a little red cherry, maybe a little bit of raspberry in there as well too. And those provide those highlights. Remember that we talked about the lighting with the backlight for the hair or something like that. You'll find that the ISOSCELES Reserve is just always a lot showier. There's a lot more going on there. Some of you want to fire up some New York strips. That sounds really wonderful. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Steve. I hope everybody enjoyed this. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to just kind of keep talking here because I think people have things they need to do. And if you're on the East Coast, it's already evening. So, you know, we're just getting into prime time here on the West Coast. But I really appreciate everybody joining in here. And I'm going to actually, I'm going to add Jen to the spotlight here.
Well, thank you.
And I don't know, I mean, maybe we should kind of start wrapping things up if there aren't any other questions. Oh, we've got a couple of people. Oh yeah, great. All right, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jen, anything else you want to kind of wrap up with a little, you know?
Sure. I just thank you everybody for supporting Justin and for coming and supporting our virtual tasting team as well. It means the world to us. And I'm so glad that we're getting such wonderful feedback and that you really enjoyed our experiences. And just so you guys know, we also offer private tastings as well. So if you have a special event or a work team building thing, that we can also create a wonderful experience for you individually. So keep that in mind as well. And Jim, thank you. Thank you so much for working so hard to put this wonderful event together. And thank you for just being awesome. And, you know,
oh, come on, you're making me blush now.
Yes. And major congratulations. We do really miss working. I do miss very much so working with Jim every single day. So it's always a really wonderful pleasure to be able to pop in and kind of work with you on these events.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. The feeling's mutual as well too. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us, and maybe we'll see you out here sometime. But you know, stay in touch, and maybe we'll see you on a virtual tasting sometime.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, guys. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.